didn't beg, I didn't argue. I just listened to my son's wife tell me I wasn't welcome at my own grandson's graduation party, the party I had quietly paid for, and I made a decision right there in that moment that would change everything. My name is Howard. I'm 63 years old, recently retired from 31 years at a civil engineering firm in Columbus, Ohio. My wife, Patricia, passed away 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, and after that, it was just me in the house we'd built together, the house where we raised our son Marcus, from a baby to a man we were both proud of. I say we're both proud of, because Patricia would have been proud of him, past tense. I'm not sure what I feel anymore. Let me back up. When Marcus married Gwen 12 years ago, I thought she was wonderful. Confident, sharp, organized, all the things that balanced my son's easygoing nature. They got married in a vineyard outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. I paid for the wedding, not because they asked me to, because Patricia had been sick for 6 months by then and couldn't travel, and I wanted Marcus to have the day he deserved. The wedding cost $44,000. I wrote the check without hesitation. After Patricia died, Marcus and Gwen were kind. For a while, they called regularly, invited me to Sunday dinners, included me in holidays. Then, gradually, things shifted. Gwen started making comments, subtle at first, then not so subtle, about how I dropped by too often, how I needed to respect their space, how my grandson Tyler needed a stable routine without the unpredictability of an elderly grandfather showing up unannounced. I want to be clear, I never showed up unannounced. I always called first. But I stopped arguing about it. I just called more in advance. Tyler is 17 now. 17 and already 6 feet tall with his mother's sharp eyes, and somewhere underneath all that teenage armor, his grandmother's laugh. I love that kid more than I can explain. I've been at every single one of his baseball games since he was 8 years old. Everyone. Even the Tuesday evening games in March, when the temperature dropped to 28 degrees and I sat in the bleachers with a thermos of coffee and a blanket across my knees. I never missed one. I also paid for his school, not publicly, not in a way that allowed anyone to pat me on the back. When Marcus mentioned Tyler had been accepted to Westview Academy, a private prep school in Dublin, Ohio, and that the tuition was steep, I said I'd cover it. $18,000 a year for 4 years. $72,000 a year for 4 years. $72,000. I set up direct payment to the school. Marcus thanked me. Gwen said she appreciated it. Then they stopped mentioning it altogether, the way people stopped thanking you for the air they breathe. I also helped them when their furnace died in February 2 years ago. $6,000, same week. And when Gwen's car needed to be replaced after a hailstorm totaled it, I co-signed the loan and covered the down payment. $11,000. I'm not listing these things to make myself sound generous. I'm listing them because you need to understand what was in the background when everything fell apart. Tyler's graduation was set for the second Saturday in June. The ceremony at Westview Academy is an event. Formal. Outdoors on the school's main lawn, followed by a catered reception at the venue the family books. I had spoken with Tyler about it back in March. He'd texted me a photo of his cap and gown, and I'd sent back a voice message because I couldn't find the right words in text. I told him his grandmother would have been so proud. He responded with a simple, "Thanks, Grandpa, I know." 2 words that meant more to me than most conversations I've had in years. In April, Gwen sent a group text to the family about the post-graduation party. They were renting out the banquet room at a restaurant in Powell, Meridian Hall, a place that runs about $400 an hour with a minimum booking of 5 hours. She asked everyone to RSVP. I responded immediately. Wouldn't miss it for anything. She read the message. Didn't respond. I didn't think much of it. Gwen wasn't known for her courtesy replies. 3 weeks later, Marcus called me on a Wednesday evening. I remember I was grilling a chicken breast on the back porch and watching the last of the daylight fade behind the tree line. He sounded strange from the first sentence, careful, like a man reading from a script he'd rehearsed but didn't fully believe in. He told me that Gwen had decided to keep the graduation party intimate. Just immediate family, her parents, her sister's family, and that they thought it would be better, smoother, he said, actually used that word, smoother, if I attended only the ceremony and skipped the party. I turned the burner off. I set the tongs down on the grill shelf. I looked out at the yard, at the bird feeder Patricia had hung from the oak tree the spring before she got sick, and I breathed. Who decided this? I asked. We both agreed, he said. But his voice said otherwise. Tyler knows. A pause. We'll talk to him. That was the moment. Right there. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter and colder than anger. A kind of clarity that only comes when you finally see something you've been choosing not to look at directly for a very long time. I told Marcus I understood. I thanked him for calling. I said I'd see them at the ceremony. And when I hung up, I sat down in the porch chair and didn't move for a long time. The next morning I called my attorney. Gerald Simmons has handled my affairs for 18 years. Wills, property, a small dispute with a neighbor over a fence line back in 2015. He's a quiet, methodical man who drinks too much coffee and takes very careful notes. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked me one question. Howard, what outcome are you looking for here? I told him. He nodded slowly over the phone. Give me a week. In the meantime, I did something I hadn't done since Patricia was alive. I took a long drive. Not anywhere specific. I drove west on Route 40, through the flat farmland outside Columbus, past the grain elevators and the small-town diners, windows down, no radio. I thought about my son as a boy, the way he used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from road trips, his head tilted against the window, mouth open, completely trusting the world. I thought about what it must be like to be the kind of man who calls his father and reads from his wife's script. I felt sorry for him. I also felt something else that I'm not proud of. Mostly, though, I was focused. When Gerald called back 8 days later, he had drafted 3 documents. The first was a formal notice withdrawing my financial support from Westview Academy, effective at the end of the current semester. The second was a letter to the bank where I had co-signed Gwen's auto loan, initiating a review of my co-signer status. The third was an amendment to my estate documents, removing Marcus and Gwen as joint beneficiaries of the primary trust and restructuring the allocations. I read every page twice. Then I signed. Gerald asked if I wanted to notify Marcus before the letters went out. I thought about it for a long time. No, I said. Let the letters speak. I went to Tyler's graduation ceremony. I sat in the 3rd row on the right side, near the aisle. I wore the navy suit Patricia had picked out for me years ago, and I kept her in my thoughts the entire time. When Tyler walked across the stage and shook the headmaster's hand, I stood up. I clapped until my palms hurt. He scanned the crowd afterward and found me, and for just a second he smiled. A real smile, the unguarded kind, and raised one hand. I raised mine back. Gwen was watching from the other side of the lawn. She looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong event. The party, I was told, went well. I drove home, changed out of my suit, and made myself a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where Patricia and I used to have breakfast every morning for 26 years, and I let myself feel the full weight of the afternoon. I wouldn't pretend it didn't hurt. It did. The kind of hurt that doesn't make noise. Marcus called that Friday. His voice was different this time. Not careful anymore. Tight. The letter from Westview Academy had arrived. The school's billing office had sent a formal notice to the family's address stating that the sponsoring account had been withdrawn and that the remaining balance for the final semester would need to be covered by the student's primary household by the 15th of July. Dad, what is this? It's exactly what it says it is. You can't do this. Tyler still has 1 semester. Marcus, I said, I can absolutely do this. The account was in my name. I opened it. I funded it. Nothing in writing said it was permanent. This is insane. This is because of the party. You're punishing Tyler because of a party? I'm not punishing Tyler. I'm restructuring my finances. It happens to have timing. He was quiet for a moment. I heard Gwen's voice in the background, low and sharp, but I couldn't make out the words. You need to fix this, Marcus said. I need to do a lot of things, I said. What I don't need to do is keep funding a life for people who don't want me at the table. I ended the call. The letter from the bank arrived at their house 2 days later. It wasn't a cancellation. I didn't have unilateral authority to end the loan, but it was a formal notification that I was initiating a review of my co-signer obligations and consulting counsel. Enough to cause alarm. Enough to make certain questions uncomfortable. Gwen called me directly for the first time in 4 years. Howard. Her voice was composed in the way that people are composed when they are actually furious. I think we need to talk about what's happening. I agree, I said. I've thought about this conversation for several weeks. I'm glad we're having it. You're doing this to hurt us. I'm doing this because your husband called me in April and told me with your blessing that I wasn't welcome at my own grandson's graduation party. A party that was held at a venue that cost, by my estimate, somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 for the evening. I know the rates at Meridian Hall. I've attended events there. She started to say something about keeping family dynamics manageable. Gwen, I said, and I kept my voice level, I have given your family more than $130,000 over the last decade. Conservatively. The wedding, Tyler's school, your car, the furnace, smaller things I didn't keep track of. And I want to be clear, I gave that money because I wanted to. Because Patricia and I believed in family, not because I expected anything in return. I paused. Except basic dignity. That's all I ever wanted. To be included, to be present for the moments that mattered. She was quiet. When your family decided that my presence was inconvenient, you made a choice. I'm simply making mine. She told me I was being vindictive. I told her I understood why it felt that way. Then I said goodbye and wished her a good evening. 2 weeks after that, Marcus came to my house alone. He sat at the kitchen table across from me, and he looked like he hadn't slept properly in days, which he probably hadn't. The school had been unwilling to extend credit on goodwill. They needed payment by the deadline, or Tyler would be unenrolled for the final semester, and would need to transfer to the public school for graduation, meaning he'd miss the Westview ceremony entirely and finish at a different school with different classmates. Marcus put both his hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. I should have told her no. When she said to call you and tell you not to come, I should have said no. I looked at my son. This man I'd watched grow up. I thought about all the ways we become complicit in things we know are wrong because we're afraid of the conflict closer to home. Why didn't you? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, quietly, because it was easier. It's remarkable how much damage the easy choice can do. I told him I needed more than an apology. I needed a conversation, not on the phone, not mediated through Gwen. With him, and with Tyler, and eventually with Gwen if she was willing. I needed to understand how we had gotten here, and I needed to know whether the family I thought we were was something we could still be. Marcus nodded. We talked for almost 3 hours that afternoon. About Patricia, about how her death created a vacuum in our family that nobody knew how to fill. About how Gwen had never been entirely comfortable with how close I was to Tyler, and how that discomfort had calcified over the years into something harder and more deliberate. About how Marcus had started choosing Gwen's peace over his own instincts so many times that he'd lost track of where her preferences ended and his own began. It was the most honest conversation my son and I had had in years, maybe ever. Tyler came over the following Saturday by himself. He drove his own car, pulled into the driveway, and stood on my porch, looking slightly like a man who had been sent on a mission he hadn't fully been briefed for. I opened the door before he could knock. We sat on the back porch where I'd been standing when Marcus called me in April. I made lemonade from scratch because Tyler had always loved it as a kid, and I still had the recipe Patricia had written on an index card that was now laminated and tucked into the kitchen drawer. He told me he hadn't known. About the call to me. About the party decision. He found out afterward when the school letter arrived and everything unraveled. He was quiet for a while after telling me, and I could see that he was working through something he hadn't fully resolved. "I would have wanted you there," he said. "I want you to know that." I told him I did know that. I told him I did know that, and I told him something I meant completely, that none of what happened was his burden to carry. I reinstated the tuition payment. Tyler finished his final semester at Westview and graduated on a Friday afternoon in late August at the makeup ceremony the school held for students who'd missed the spring date due to extenuating circumstances. There were 6 of them on the stage. I was in the front row. Gwen did not come to the makeup ceremony. Marcus did. He sat next to me, and we didn't talk much. But at one point, when Tyler took his diploma and turned to face the small audience gathered on the school's courtyard, Marcus reached over and put his hand on my shoulder briefly, the way fathers do to sons. And for a moment, I felt it in reverse, and thought about my own father, who had died when I was 31, too young, before he ever got to see what kind of man I became. I like to think he would have been satisfied. Things between Marcus and Gwen were difficult for a while after that. I won't pretend otherwise. The estate documents remained amended through the rest of that year. I made no announcements about them. I simply left them as they were. A quiet accounting of where things stood. In January, Gwen came to the house for the first time in over 2 years. She sat at the same kitchen table. She did not apologize easily. It wasn't in her nature, but she said something that I thought took more honesty than she usually allowed herself. She said she had been afraid of how much Tyler loved me, that she'd interpreted it as a kind of competition, that somewhere along the way she'd decided the solution was distance rather than inclusion. It wasn't an apology that erased anything, but it was the beginning of something more honest than we'd had. I still have the auto loan co-signature on Gwen's car. I never finalized the review. Gerald filed it away. The estate documents, I updated them again in March. They reflect something closer to what Patricia would have wanted. Not a punishment, not a reward. Just the shape of a family that is still imperfectly learning how to be one. Tyler texts me most Sundays, nothing important usually. Score of a game he's watching, a photo of something he thought I'd find funny, occasionally just a check-in. Last month, he texted me a photo of a bird feeder he'd bought for his college dorm windowsill. Against the rules, probably, but he sent it anyway and said it reminded him of Grandma's. I sat with that message for a long time before I answered. Some things you can't rebuild once they're broken. Some things, though, you can. Slowly, carefully, with a lot of honesty and a willingness to sit at the kitchen table, even when the conversation is hard. That's what I know now, at 63, that I didn't fully understand at 40. The table matters more than being right about who belongs at it, but you have to be willing to stand up and remind people that you belong there, quietly, firmly, with everything you have. I didn't cry, I didn't beg, and I'm still here. I keep coming back to that Wednesday evening on the back porch, the chicken on the grill, the light fading behind the tree line, Marcus's voice reading from a script he didn't believe in, and me standing there with a pair of tongs in my hand, making a decision that was quieter than anything I'd ever done before. What I've come to understand, not as a theory, but as something I lived through, is that the way things end up is rarely an accident. Every outcome has a long chain of choices behind it. Gwen didn't become the woman who excluded me from Tyler's party overnight. That happened slowly, through years of small decisions that nobody challenged. And Marcus didn't become the man who called his father with someone else's words in one afternoon. That happened because I kept saying yes when the honest answer would have been harder, because I wrote check after check and told myself that money given freely carries no weight, no expectation, no meaning. I was wrong about that. Not because generosity should come with strings, it shouldn't, but because I confused generosity with silence. I gave, and then I went quiet, and that silence was interpreted as permission. That's the thing about moral clarity. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives slowly, usually only after you've spent years looking the other way. I knew something was off in my relationship with Marcus and Gwen long before that phone call. I chose to overlook it because the alternative, the honest conversation, the boundary drawn clearly, felt like it would cost more than the discomfort I was already carrying. The cost of that choice was a graduation party I wasn't welcome at, paid for by money I provided, for a grandson who would have wanted me there. What I did after that call wasn't revenge, though I understand why it looked that way. It was the first genuinely clear-headed decision I had made in years. It required me to think carefully, not reactively, not emotionally, about what my resources actually meant, what I was actually owed, and what a person of integrity does when the people they love have stopped treating them with basic respect. Calling Gerald, reading every document twice, waiting 8 days before signing. That wasn't anger. That was the slowest, most deliberate version of myself, and I'm grateful I had that discipline at 63. And then Tyler texted me a picture of a bird feeder. That's the part I didn't plan for, the part where the whole story turns out to be about something smaller and more important than the money or the party or the letters from the attorney. It's about a 17-year-old boy who saw a bird feeder in a store and thought of his grandmother. That's what you're actually working toward when you hold yourself together through the hard parts. Not a legal victory, not an apology at a kitchen table, though those matter. You're working toward the moments where the people you love most show you, in some small and unannounced way, that the years meant something. I didn't cry when Marcus put his hand on my shoulder at Tyler's makeup ceremony. I came close, but I held it together, the way you learn to hold things together when you've been doing it long enough. Because that's what you owe the people standing next to you. Your steadiness, your presence, your refusal to collapse under the weight of what almost didn't happen. I'm still here. That's the whole lesson.